when people are starting to even craft the idea of coming to an experience, to what happens while they're there, to what happens after they leave and how you stay connected. And when you're able to thread that needle all the way through and create that perfect sandwich, then that is it's happened, right? And in a mission organization, if you create that frictionless guest experience, then most likely people are going to want to stay connected with you long after they leave. And that builds loyalty, that builds them to carry them to that next level, builds members, and hopefully they make donations and they take action.
The future of fun begins at IAAPA FEC Summit, January 19th through the 21st, 2025 in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Join FEC and LBE professionals for an immersive experience packed with strategic insights, networking, and behind-the-scenes EDUTours of unique local facilities.
Learn how to make your FEC stand out in a crowded market and explore the latest trends designed to elevate your business.
Build valuable connections and leave inspired with actionable strategies for success.
Click the link in the show notes to reserve your spot today.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Matt, how's it going?
It's going fantastically, Josh. How are you?
Doing great. Question for you.
Yes, sir.
You talk a lot about team member performance and behavior, and we both talk a lot about it's the people that really make an experience what it is when visiting an attraction. But have you ever had an animal create a memorable experience for you?
Yes. I'm trying to think of one. I know I have. Oh, I'll give you one. Do you want to hear it?
Sure.
Okay. So the animal didn't know that it was creating a memorable experience. Does that count?
Go on. I think so.
So you've been to Georgia Aquarium.
Yes.
The beluga whales.
Yeah.
Georgia Aquarium. I may have even said this before on the podcast. I could sit and watch those for hours. I don't know why. And they just like swim in a circle, and they go back and forth, but I could just sit and watch them and totally memorable. I can see them in my mind's eye right now. Totally a reason for me to go back to Georgia Aquarium. So yeah, they created a memorable experience for me. How about you?
Cool. Well, I also think of Georgia Aquarium actually, but I would go to the whale sharks. That would be yeah, I could watch those for hours. And then probably a handful of others too. I met Lancelot, a 95-year-old tortoise at Lion Country Safari. Pretty cool experience.
Very cool.
Yeah, definitely. He definitely made the experience for me. The reason I bring this up is because our guest today, David Rosenberg, when he shares early memories of his childhood and visiting attractions, he talks about visiting the San Diego Zoo, and one of the most memorable experiences was a bear waving at guests as guests went by and thinking, we talk about, it's people that really bring the experience to life, but in zoos and aquariums, a lot of times it could be the animals too.
Absolutely. It could be the animals, and it could be really anything that a person had to put together that creates the experience, right? Because there's maintenance people who are making sure that the walkways are clear or that there's no trip hazards and the fences are upright. And so sometimes it could even be the things that people are doing that you don't necessarily realize are creating a memorable experience because it kept you safe.
Ooh, there you go. A lot to think about there.
A lot to think about. So what did David talk to us about?
Well, so David Rosenberg, who, by the way, is a repeat offender here on the Attraction Pros podcast. We last had him in episode 152, which was, the summer of 2020. Not much to talk about during then. But since then, he has now recently become the executive vice president of growth and experience for SSA Ventures. So SSA has been around for decades, for many, many years. He gives some of the history behind it. And they are one of the largest providers for food and beverage, retail, and admissions for attractions of all scopes and sizes, including many cultural attractions of zoos, museums, and aquariums. David Rosenberg specifically works on the SSA Ventures side of it and tells us all about what that is like and areas that he's focusing on in that role.
And so one of those big things is the next level hospitality, which I know is obviously a big focus of yours in terms of hospitality and really taking it to the next level. He talks a lot about a frictionless and seamless experience when it comes to that.
Yes, he also talks about trends and sustainability, which I think he talked a little bit about last time he was on too, but now he's on the other side of the coin here, on the concessionaire side, and particularly when talking about food and beverage and retail. Those are areas that historically could have a lot of waste. So he talks about what they're doing from a sustainability standpoint, especially making sure that it very much aligns with the mission of the organizations that they partner with.
And making that a seamless experience when you have these third-party team members that are now delivering the mission of a cultural attraction.
Yes, exactly. So that frictionless visitor experience of, like you said, making that seamless from prior to arrival into the duration of the experience, and then even what's the engagement like afterwards.
So is it time to grab our feed and feed the animals and get David to tell us a little bit more about himself and his current experiences?
Yes, and make sure to wave back to the bear too. It's only polite.
Hey, David, welcome back to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing?
I'm great. It's good to see you all again.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Thank you so much for coming back. You're in a new role. It's been a little while since we've chatted in this context, and give us a little update about what's been happening since the last time we chatted.
Well, I think I was reminiscing about the last time we connected, which was, 2020? And we were just a couple months into COVID, which I mean, so you want to talk about what has changed? Oh my gosh. Right? And I remember when we actually met, we were just talking about, of course, the hot topic, but I was thinking to myself, we're a couple months in now. This is all gonna resolve itself pretty quickly, and we're gonna open our doors. Well, I was at Monterey Bay Aquarium at the time, and we ended up having our doors closed for 14 months. So it was it's almost fun for me to go and reflect now on that conversation, what I thought then, what I know now, and all the things that we learned in between. So it's a lot clearly has changed between now and then.
And now you've since taken on a new role. You're not with Monterey Bay Aquarium anymore. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so this is relatively new news. I did leave Monterey Bay Aquarium back in May to join SSA Ventures, and that, as you can imagine, after 17 years at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, what an exciting opportunity, what an exciting choice, but a huge monumental shift for me as well. And so, reflecting all the way back to 2020 when we were talking about COVID and all the changes there and changes afterwards, and now changes for me of jumping into a new company and a new role. It's been a really exciting time for me personally as well as professionally, and I'm really excited to be part of that.
So, David, can you give people who might not be familiar with SSA Ventures kind of exactly what you do?
Yeah. So I'll give you a little bit more just background on SSA and then tell you more about my role in particular. So SSA was formed over 50 years ago. So it's a company that's been around quite a while. It's a family-run company. Sean McNicholas is our CEO, and it's always been his family at the helm of it. But it started 50 years ago with a handshake. Now, can you imagine now if we said, hey, our organization started with a handshake? But it was just that. It was Sean's father, Kevin, working with the Denver Mile High Stadium, and he had a relationship there, and started that into just that. Had a handshake to take over the food and beverage and merchandise and some other components of that stadium, and that quickly blossomed to a business throughout Denver where he was operating food and beverage and merchandise in various attractions, and ultimately that grew throughout the United States. So that's how SSA got formed. SSA has two parts. We have SSA Group, which is our food and beverage, merchandise, and ticketing, and a couple other components, where we partner with an organization, and whether it's a cultural attraction or a theme park or any type of attraction, and SSA will operate those components within the attraction. That's kind of our group part. And then our other side, which is relatively new, is called SSA Ventures, and that's where I'm focusing the majority of my time. And SSA Ventures is kind of what is that next level of hospitality, the next level of technology? What is going to drive the future in attractions and hospitality, and looking at that and building a company that supports that is what we're focused on that side. And so in Ventures, we have a lot of components. The technology part, attraction, you've probably heard some parts like Attractions.io, Synchios, Integra. That's some of the technology that we own and operate. We have Behavioral Essentials, which is a hiring, helps with the hiring and helping the managers to build their skills in all areas. And so Behavioral Essentials is part of us, and we've got quite a few other components that all make up Ventures, and we're continuing to expand that as well. So that's what I'm doing, and that's where I've been primarily focused.
Cool. Sounds like we have a lot to unpack, a lot of different areas for us to dive into here. I'm curious about your title, Executive Vice President of Growth and Experience. So I feel like kind of everything you just shared kind of dovetails nicely into this. Tell us what that title means, and really what all that includes.
Yeah, well, as you know, of course, experience is my passion, right? I've the last 17 years, that's what I've been hyper focused on in Monterey, is how do we take the experience, how do we get people through the door, build an experience that not only is hopefully one of the best in the world, but also moves people towards taking action. And that's been our focus where I came from. So now taking that to Ventures, there's those two parts. So experience, what are we doing across our 90 plus areas that we're associated with, and enhancing the experience to be forward thinking and that next level experience. How are we building our ventures company to make sure that we're that the ventures company is the future? It's not current, it's about the future, and how crafting that future visitor experience and putting that all together. So that's the experience part of where I'm focused on. Now, growth, of course, goes hand in hand. You can't, if you're going to be building experience, you're also not only you growing the experience at the various areas that we're associated with, we're also growing our company. That's part of being a company, is you want to make sure that you are building an experience that then also crafts growth as well. And so that's those are the primary parts that I focus on and that's what my title reflects as well.
So, David, I know you said this is a relatively recent move, given how long you were at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it sounds like you've already been there for a long time. The way you're talking about it, and the depth of knowledge that you have, and I'm curious if we could go back just for a minute on what that transition was like, going from that position and the life you had at the aquarium, and then now moving into a completely different role, new office, new kind of new everything. What that transition's been like for you?
Yeah, well, I think one of the biggest transitions was definitely when you say office. Here I am. It's going transitioning from where I was in an office with lots of different people around every day to spending a lot of my time in a home office or in our Denver office or elsewhere. But I'll tell you, I thought that it was going to be a monumental shift for me to really have to think about going from a for-profit to a nonprofit organization. And I quickly realized that was far from the truth. That was not that was not the case. And I think a lot of people, when they transition, do a transition like I do, they have this big thought about how different it's going to be, and then you get into it and realize, wow, there's so many connections to what I was doing and how that carried me over. In fact, that's why you typically go into another position, is because you take the expertise from what you did before and you get to apply it on a bigger scale. So I definitely learned that lesson. Now, we've talked about my background before. I, of course, worked for Disney Hyatt Hotels Corporation, and then went to the nonprofit world. So it's a full circle for me to go back in for-profit. In the for-profit areas, especially hotels, you're so focused on visitor experience. You need, if you're a certain flag, you better be better at that experience than the flag that's right next to you, or people are going to pick that flag. And then likewise, if you're hyper focused on visitor experience, you also have to make money, right? Because you're a hotel, you're trying to build profit at the same time you're trying to provide that best experience. And that's not very dissimilar from what you do in a nonprofit organization, nonprofit attraction, because yes, we're a business as a nonprofit attraction as well. We're trying to build the best visitor experience. In that case, we're trying to build the experience to move people towards our mission. In a for-profit, we're trying to build the experience to build towards our mission, which also supports our profitability. So it's so well connected, and I found that it was miraculous to me just how connected the two were when I came to this side of it.
I'm curious as far as what changes or what differences perhaps that you had expected shifting from nonprofit into for-profit that maybe were more similar to your previous role, and perhaps if there were any things that had changed, because SSA is a for-profit company, but the majority of businesses or the majority of partnerships are with nonprofits, with cultural attractions like aquariums and zoos and museums. So I see kind of the symbiotic relationship between the two. So curious as far as perhaps what you had anticipated to be more different that is actually more the same.
Yeah, I think there's a couple thoughts there, and for one part of it is we as an SSA as an organization, like you said, we're associated with 90 plus different attractions around primarily the United States. And so when we do things, we're able to really broadcast that out across tens of millions of visitors. So imagine in one institution, a robust institution, you're typically going to have maybe 2 million visitors if you have higher volume, or plus or minus, obviously. But in an organization like I'm associated with now, we have tens of millions of visitors that we touch throughout the year, and that's in all different regions and all different areas. And each of those attractions have their own personality and their own mission and things that they carry together. So going from the nonprofit organization where we were focused on just our one mission to a for-profit organization that associates with 90 plus different missions and helping to carry them all forward, I really get excited about how much of a bigger impact I personally am able to help make, but as well as my organization is able to make. And if we're helping those organizations make their impacts, then of course we're being successful. And as a profitable company as well, if we're helping them with their success, and obviously we're going to be profitable in what we do. So it's it was a little bit of a mind shift about that, but I think it was more of a, oh my gosh, this is such a bigger scope of what we can do, and we need to think about it that way, and I was able to carry that over.
It sounds like you just needed to kind of connect the right dots in terms of, I'm thinking this way, but if I look at it this way, it's kind of the same thing, and I just tweak a little bit here and there. So it's really interesting. One of the things that you talked about that I found really fascinating is when you said there's 90 different missions, give or take, that with all those different cultural attractions and zoos and aquariums. I would imagine, though, that one of the things that ties them all together, especially zoos and aquariums, are things like sustainability. And I know that's something that you're really passionate about. So can you talk a little bit about how SSA might help with those sustainability efforts at a zoo or aquarium?
Yeah. I mean, great question, because in Monterey, our mission, our statement was to inspire conservation of the ocean, and that was, of course, very much about sustainability. And that actually is what got me really intrigued by some of the work that SSA was doing at the time, because SSA operates the food and beverage merchandise in Monterey, and was able to take some of the learnings that we had of sustainable seafood, sustainable purchasing power, and broadcast that out to every place that it was associated with. And for the most part, cultural attractions will have a sustainability part in their mission, and clearly that really aligns well and brings stuff out. It also just, we talked about how we can broadcast in a wider area. We can make also a big difference through having the level of purchasing power that we have. So if you're a company like SSA that is large enough that the vendors, of course, they want you, they need you, and if you get somebody like SSA to be carrying your product, then that is very big for the vendors that are associated with us. And so the collective buying power of an organization like this really moves the needle in sustainability, and people come into alignment with that. And so, as an example, as we're eliminating plastic water bottles across SSA accounts, then that's a huge shift in the water bottle industry for everybody that's associated with that, because you can imagine how many food and beverage outlets are operated by us. So sustainability is really, it's just a really cool thing to be part of, and having a company like SSA that's hyper focused on it is really able to move that needle and carry forward the missions of the organizations we're with.
I'd love to go even deeper into this if we're able to, and do kind of maybe some more specific, additional specific examples. You mentioned eliminating plastic water bottles. When I think of environments like food and beverage, and to an extent retail, that those are probably likely the areas that have the highest possibility for waste, thus making sustainability needing to be a higher priority, especially with when working largely with organizations like zoos and aquariums and cultural attractions, where it's such a high priority to make sure that that the priority of the F&B provider matches the priority of the organization of itself. So curious if you could talk a little bit more about maybe some whether it's trends or changes we've seen in recent years, or areas of focus that that you're ensuring, or that you're helping to ensure, that these environments are seeing to match the mission of sustainability with the organization.
Yeah, I think plastics tends to be one of the biggest discussions that throughout cultural institutions is what plastics are and how everybody can make an impact, whether it's through education about plastics, whether it's mitigating plastics, whether it's reducing, recycling, and reusing. And so I know that's definitely the conversations that come up quite a bit. And through buying power, through education, and through the things that we can do across all these attractions, you can really make just, again, a big difference in those areas. Within our organization, we definitely have some key pillars that we're focused on. We want to reduce emissions, the emissions that attractions or the operations that we have are producing. We're looking at electrification of kitchens to eliminate, to some degree, the gas emissions that can happen in kitchens as well, and the energy usage. Our buying power, again, is huge, and I think probably one of our biggest assets is our buying power, and being able to broadcast that. And then likewise, making sure that's part of our DNA. So it's one thing when an organization says, yeah, we're responsible, we're sustainable, but it needs to be part of the DNA of the organization. So everybody's thinking about that and how can they contribute to it, because just having pillars is not enough. It's actually having everybody to live and breathe and be part of that mission, that goal. And quite frankly, on a competitive basis, it's important that you're in alignment of that as well, because if, as an SSA, you want to make sure you're aligning with the organizations that you support, and that's a big piece of it too.
Well, and that's something I'd like to dive into a little bit. This might be somewhat of a related question, but what you just said there is that the SSA partner has to really align with the venue that they're working with, right? And so we talked about that a little bit from a sustainability perspective, but also from a standards perspective. The guest that might come in, to a zoo or an aquarium probably doesn't know that this is SAA operated, right? And there's I don't know if there's a big sign. This is SAA, like it's just the themed, eating area or retail space. So what are some of those steps that you take to make sure that the operation is meeting the same SSA standards that it needs to, while also meeting the venue standards?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I can reflect on, first of all, a little bit of my background. When one of the big takeaways for me early in my career was that you need to have frictionless visitor experience. It needs to be consistent from the time somebody is thinking about coming to an attraction. And we all know this. I know the two of you have definitely talked a lot about this on the podcast in the past, but when people are starting to even craft the idea of coming to an experience, to what happens while they're there, to what happens after they leave, and how you stay connected. And when you're able to thread that needle all the way through and create that perfect sandwich, then that is it's happened, right? And in a mission organization, if you create that frictionless guest experience, then most likely people are going to want to stay connected with you long after they leave. And that builds loyalty, that builds them to carry them to that next level, builds members, and hopefully they make donations and they take action. So knowing that part of it is something that has just always been so key to our attractions and so key to hopefully some of the stuff that I bring forward. How does that get carried out now through SSA is the goal is just that, to be part of the organization that we operate within. So a visitor should never know that they're talking to an SSA employee versus that institution's employee, and even to the point where hopefully the uniforms are the same, because why have different uniforms? They should all look the same from start to finish. Same name tag, same training level, same level of engagement, hopefully higher levels of engagement. And so it's really important that that remains seamless, and that's kind of the focus that we bring. That's the experience part of what I'm doing. The work that I'm behind is very much about that too, about how do we not only carry on that experience, but make sure that we're meeting future expectations and developing expectations as well. I'm going off subject a little bit, but kind of something that comes to mind on this, and I love telling stories. But I remember when I first started in Monterey, and a lot of what I've always was talking about with our staff was, how do we know we're in a good experience today, but we need to be that good experience of tomorrow, because the bar is always being raised. You're only as good as the experience that person had last. So Matt, if you walk in someplace into a retail store and you had some unique experience that really stood out to you, then that's your new bar, right? That's the new low level, because anything that's the old experience is no longer going to meet your expectations. And so that bar is always raising. So you always want to stay ahead of that, right? And think about that. And so I remember talking about this 17 years ago, and I went down to LA Live when it had just opened up, and checked into a hotel there just literally like 2 days after having this conversation with some of our teams. And when I got into that lobby, it was the coolest thing. It was a brand new hotel. There's loud music playing, and there's staff walking around. And what really stood out was, instead of having a front desk, which I had always grown up with in my Hyatt days, a front desk and that had a barrier between the staff member and the visitor, they removed the front desk in LA Live, and they replaced them with podiums. And so what that meant is these visitors were the guests were coming in. Yeah, and it was almost like a party atmosphere, and the staff were walking around, and they bring you over to the podium, and they'd have a transaction with you, and then you'd want to hang out because it was so cool. And it went from being transactional to being experiential, and that was just amazing. And it was more efficient, because instead of people waiting in line and walking up to you, the staff member went out and seeked the person out and brought them over. It just really transitioned that experience. So we went back and we looked at that and said, what would this look like in attractions? And the next thing you knew, in Monterey, we removed every single desk that existed. Everybody was standing up, put podiums in place, And it became just that engaging, and it was the staff loved it, the visitors loved it, and it was a lot more efficient. So we could actually do more with less and have more in-depth conversations. What happened? The net promoter scores went through the roof. Our visitor engagement scores went through the roof because they were very engaged, and we were a lot more efficient. And that was just an eye-opener to me about why you always want to stay ahead of what that next level, what you should expect to be that next level of engagement. So, so that was a takeaway for me in my previous life that I kind of brought forward. And this ties back now to your question about how do we engage in the different places that we're in, is hopefully we're always looking for that next level of engagement. Hopefully we're always looking at what lies ahead, and hopefully we're bringing in the expertise that we have being this big of a provider across these different institutions to know what that is and help the organization have that seamless, frictionless experience from start to finish.
Really interesting takeaways just from that. I imagine a lot of people probably have a lot of light bulb moments going on. And you bring up a really good point that's worth repeating, that the good experience of today versus the good experience of tomorrow, and making comparisons that are outside the industry. That, yes, who do you compete against? There's, the areas that are local within your region serving similar demographics, but you're competing with Ritz-Carlton and Southwest Airlines and Chick-fil-A and the Apple Store and even Amazon and Netflix and DoorDash, as far as just what those experiences are like outside of our industry, outside of comparable types of experiences. And I think you gave a great example right there, the LA Live with the podiums at the front desk. And what it kind of reminded me of a little bit was when SeaWorld San Diego refurbished their entire front gate, their admissions area. And it went from that kind of box office, like window, very transactional, but also it's just inherently impersonal, but we still see it in many cases throughout the industry, where it then became this kind of this cleaner, almost front desk style. So it wasn't quite the podiums, but it still almost felt like you were going into a luxury hotel versus maybe like a bank or something that was like very guarded and very impersonal and has that barrier and lacks that face-to-face. So you've said next level a number of times, and you've given us kind of some little snippets here. You said next level hospitality at the very beginning. You mentioned next level of engagement, and would love to go just even deeper into really kind of what you see those looking like, and maybe really establishing what's the baseline, and even knowing how do we then project into the future and seeing what the next level is, and really maybe where your gears are turning into saying, okay, this is how this should look in the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, a couple different parts. So Sean McNicholas, our CEO, he grew up on 452 Leiden Street, and he loves telling this story. And so 452 Leiden, that was his house. It was in Denver. And when you talk to him, he just is so passionate about what was it like? What's his memories of 452 Leiden? Well, that's where his family was. They were the type of family that always had their front door unlocked, and all the kids in the neighborhood and families would come in and out all day long. And there was always food cooking and those good smells that occurred. It was always hospitable because people were welcome, and they would come in, and the parents would be giving out hugs to everybody that came through the door. And so he paints this picture of this just amazing 452 Leiden Street that is becoming the culture of our organization. So 452 Hospitality is now the name of our hospitality drive, and it's built on the roots of what is the memory of the past and how are you building that future. And having those memories of 452 Leiden Street is just such a cool story, right? I mean, we all have these memories of our childhood and where hospitality was and how those all came together. So those are really helping to build the future and build how we think about that. Now fast forward, how do you stay ahead of the curve? What is it that you need to be doing? And it's looking at where I keep going back to the word friction, and where is there friction and how do you remove it? We were talking earlier about COVID, right? And coming out of COVID. Well, what was the friction points when we came out of COVID that we never would have anticipated? Northern California, we were checking COVID vaccinations. So, quickly when we reopened the door, we had new friction points that we never would have anticipated, and I wish we did. We had to check those vaccination points. So what do? We look for technology to fix that. We went to Clear, and we used Clear to help get people expedited through the door. Then we were checking people's bags for security. And the last thing anybody wanted coming out of COVID was to be us digging around in people's bags and getting up close to them. So again, we had a friction point that we turned to technology to reduce that. And we went to Evolve and created the opportunity for people to walk through and get automatic checks. Then heat mapping is something that all attractions were really looking at to see where we have dense populations so you can spread out those populations. Those were friction points that came up that were not anticipated. I would say that we can anticipate most of the friction points that are going to come up in the future now, and we want to understand that and likewise know what to engage with that. So when we're talking about like ventures, that's a big part of how we're building our ventures. Is we want to remove those friction points and build hospitality from the time somebody's thinking about an attraction until after they leave. We use technology to do a lot of that, like an attractions IO that helps a visitor all the way through their visit. But there's a lot of other things to be thinking about too. So we need to be forward thinking. We're looking at what friction points might come up in the future, and we do everything we can to eliminate that and create that perfect visitor experience to carry somebody to the post visit and hopefully keep them engaged and hopefully help them to come to action. So that get back to the question that you originally brought up.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was awesome.
Yeah, that was great. That was great. But it actually brings up something that I don't know if I'm going to be able to phrase this the right way, but you've mentioned the word frictionless a couple times, seamless, and some people might equate that with smooth, right? A smooth experience. But there are some attractions where you don't want to necessarily smooth experience. Like part of that is like you're getting disrupted. Like I'm thinking about a haunted house. You know what I mean? And you're going through a haunted house and you don't want that to be smooth and frictionless because that's actually part of the experience. And maybe that's the only example I can think of right now. But I'm also thinking of like, Josh, when we were at the aquarium down in New Orleans, and they had the complaint that the people were getting through too quickly, right? So they actually put somebody out in the walkway with a tarantula, I think we saw, right? With a little exhibit that actually stopped them in the walkway. So is that a friction point? Is that a new attraction point? So I guess where my brain goes is how frictionless is frictionless? And maybe that's not even a question, but that was just something that popped to mind that a hospitality expert like you should be able to answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I love the haunted house part of it. And that's I think at least the way I think of friction might be a little bit different. So and what I mean by that, we've all been to places where we walk in the door, we're all excited to be there, and then and we know that we want to go to that haunted house right away, or we know exactly what we want to do, but what we don't know is how to get there.
Yeah.
And do I go left? Do I go right? Do I go? What is my best pathway to get to what I want to do? And likewise, after I leave, how do I stay connected? Is there a website? Are they going to reach out to me? What am I going to do if I want to come back for a second time? Am I going to get a discount? What's going to happen? So I think in my mind, I'm looking at friction of how do we meet the expectations of that visitor, exceed the expectations of that visitor, knowing that they're ever changing, and we're removing any barriers that get in the way that would cause friction. So yes, a haunted house is a disruptor and they're very scared, but what is more of a disruptor is if we can't get them to that haunted house to have the experience that they're after, and that really takes away from them wanting from their overall experience and them building loyalty. So I think that's the way I really look at that.
So you mentioned the three main phases of the guest or the visitor experience, the planning process of it, of how to get there, which way do I turn, et cetera, and then the duration while they're there, and then the post-visit engagement, and talking about kind of that sandwich there. I'm curious as far as 1 and 3, particularly with SSA being I guess, outsourced concessionaire operator, and maybe even kind of brings out a broader question of saying, are these your guests, or they are the guests of SSA's clients and partners? How do you help to build that engagement when they are the guest of the venue that they are visiting, and while they're there, the duration is when you capture them as SSA guests?
Yeah. Well, I think this ties back to what we talked about earlier about just how we operate as one organization when we're part of an attraction, right? So it doesn't matter who's getting the paycheck for issuing the ticket or building the ticketing platforms or the food and beverage or anything else. It's one part all the way through. And when you do that, then you're also building one team all the way through. And so the organizations that like SSA is part of, the most successful ones are definitely where the management team that represents the different components of SSA is also at the exact same table, part of the and considers the part of the same management team that operates the rest of the attraction. And likewise, it's a symbiotic relationship. So SSA has the opportunity to bring expertise across from everything that we've learned from all the different organizations we're part of. We have a collective understanding, a collective power of understanding the industry wider than a single entity might be able to on their own. And so that's something that we're able to bring to the table. At the same time, the organizations bring into the part about their expertise in the mission that they serve. So it's really, again, back to symbiotic. It really works well when that relationship's set up in that way, and we help build on each other. I love walking into seeing even where areas where we operate food and beverage, and the staff of the organization comes into the kitchen and spends 10, 15 minutes with the chef learning about how their practices are sustainable and influence in sustainability beyond our walls. What a great lesson for the staff of that organization and stuff that they're going to carry out into the visitor experience, and likewise bring it the other direction. And so it's just really everybody working together and understanding what all the values are that we each bring to the table when we work together.
Yeah, it's a great way to kind of look at things holistically, right? I love that. I love that. Well, David, you mentioned that we all have a story from maybe our childhood or early in our years that maybe hooked us on the concept of hospitality. I'm curious, what's one of your stories from back then?
That's a great question. I tend to tell the same story, which is when I was 7 years old. I remember my father loading my family. I have two older brothers, and we had a 1976 Cadillac Seville. It was green. I can't imagine like how that was ever an attractive car, but in today's standards. But and we would load in, and we would go from Scottsdale, Arizona to San Diego, and we'd stay in Southern California. And we would have 3 stops on that family vacation in July. We would go to SeaWorld, and I would walk around SeaWorld, and I wanted to be a dolphin trainer. I was just what back as a 7-year-old mind, that's what I wanted to be. And then we would go from SeaWorld, we'd spend our next day at San Diego Zoo. And I remember the hospitality there of Chester the bear. There was a bear there that would wave at the vans as they went by, the buses. And that was my memory then, was just the interaction with Chester the bear and seeing that and be really engaging with the animals there and wanting to conserve and preserve them. And then we would spend our last part of our vacation at Disneyland. And I remember my parents always saying, this is where they wrote hospitality. Look at everybody smiling. And it was almost like a game to look for a staff member that wasn't smiling or wasn't engaging. And that was kind of what we brought into Disneyland, was just how engaged everybody was and telling the Walt Disney stories and everything else. So, I of course reflect on that of being, wow, that was my introduction to hospitality and attractions. And that's probably what, like many of us, drove us into the attractions industry. But I also, I think about what are some of we're back to the word friction. What are some of the things that they dealt with on that? I only saw all the cool stuff, but they walked up to that front desk and had somebody take their credit card and had a transaction, and dealt with that. Or they went and dealt with the traffic of getting lost because we're carrying, paper maps to get to Disneyland from San Diego. I remember we always got lost, and never bothered me, but of course my parents were stressed about it. And so I think back then about what were the stress points that took away from a vacation, where as a 7-year-old I never saw. And today, how if somebody pulled out a paper map, they would laugh, right? People, everything's on our phones. And how things have just changed and how that bar continues to get raised, and what I thought of back then and what I think of today. It just is really, built how I think of things.
That's awesome. That's a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for spending some time with us today. We really appreciate it. And as we start to wind this down here, David, if people want to learn more about SSA Ventures, or if they want to get a hold of you directly, where would you send them?
Yeah, I mean that's way to get in touch with us is either for me directly through LinkedIn. That's obviously a great way, or to go on the SSA website. And from the SSA website, there's definitely a lot of different connections that people can connect with us as well. So lots of different ways, but clearly, I love running into everybody throughout AZA, IAAPA, and all the different associations that I'm personally associated with, as well as all of us on this call. So lots of ways to stay connected.
Excellent, David. We'll make sure we get that stuff in the show notes so people can reach out to you. So are you up for doing this in another 4 years again?
Absolutely. It'll
Right.
think that will change in 4 years. So that'll be a great reflection. And congratulations to both of you for so many episodes and for carrying this forward for so many years.
Thank you. Thank you. And of course, now you've been a part of 2 of them. So you're really helping the legacy of Attraction Pros. So we appreciate that. And for everybody out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all Attraction Pros.